7th of June, Rabbi Fabian substituting for Rabbi Levitt, Sefer Chofetz Chaim.
Okay, we're holding in Hilchos Lashon. It calls it Hilchos Lashon Hora Klal Vav Shmiras HaLashon.
Right.
And we were in Tess. Yesterday. We read part of Tess. I don't know if we finished Tess. I don't think we finished Tess.
I think you're right. And also, I have a question.
Okay, right. You had a question about Miriam or something.
Yeah. So my question was, it's kind of a digression, but we had mentioned that the reason that Moshe separated from Tzipporah was because he had to be available. He couldn't be tamei when he was communicating with Hashem.
Right.
So for a female, if she's had relations within 3 days, then she could become tamei at any moment if she has an emission.
Okay, so
why wouldn't she be well aware of this problem? And why wouldn't she have a rule that she has to separate from her husband?
It seems to be that at least the way the Chazal says it is that they just want to wash their hands. There were different levels of kedusha, different levels of tuma, even for the Nevi'im on this very high level, and it didn't seem to be. The problem was the problem wasn't for her issue of having had been with her husband, like the Kabbalah Torah, they had to separate for 3 days. The problem was actually being with a spouse at the time when they're supposed to be receiving a nevuah. That was the issue, apparently, in that particular case. I mean, this like the chukim of neviah, we're not exactly familiar with the rules of nevuah and the rules of tuma. They're both of them in themselves are very complex, but that seems to be the way it's brought down. Was that the problem in that particular case was only if the spouse would be with each other at the moment when Hashem comes to them. That seemed to be the only issue. So therefore, it wasn't an issue for other Nevi'im, where it was an issue for Moshe Rabbeinu.
I see.
At least that's as much as we can get from the information from the Chumash and from what I've saw from Parsha. That sounds like the story.
Yeah.
Best we can. Like I said, we're far, thousands of years from the Nevi'im, and we haven't had the Dini Tuma for a long time as well. So we're a little bit disconnected from these, even though we have a whole Seder Taharos. There's a whole Seder Taharos that I've been through a couple times, at least 2 or 3 times, probably 3 times, and we know, but it's and we know people try their best to have kedusha and tahara in our day just as well, to a certain extent, except for we have a problem with tumas mace, but we don't, more than they tell us in the Chumash, we don't really know. Okay, so which is what I told you. So let's try to review over a little bit from yesterday. It says here in the inside, and then I will continue where we left off. It says in Klal Tes, Kashem Shishayach Isra Kabbalas Lashon Hara, just like it's relevant, the Isser receiving of Lashon Hara, the Im HaMisaper Siperlo Al Echad, that the speaker of Lashon Hara on one person, Sha'asa Ata, that does now, Devar She'enu Hagan, that does at this point in time something that isn't appropriate, Shinitztavu Al Zeh, that we have a commandment on this thing that he's doing. We have a commandment, Shinitztavu Al Zeh, Shelo Yahachlit B'li Beinu Shadavar Emes, that we have a commandment to make a decision, to decide in our hearts that the thing is not emes, is not true, what's being spoken, the negative aspect of it. In other words, it may be that the action was correct, but the negative connotation is not correct. Like we said in the Sif Olive, Cain also, it's Cain Shayach Gam Cain Isser Kabbalas Lashon Hara Le'inyan Shar Chelke Isser Lashon Hara Yarnu Isle. It's also relevant, this Isser of receiving Lashon Hara to the remainder of the portions of the forbidden aspects of Lashon Hara that we explained above. And then he goes on to say, in a parentheses, Kugoin Levazosa B'maisa Avos, or b'maisa harishonim, and that the person is being embarrassed for the actions of his forefathers, or b'maisa rishonim, or things he did himself, kevan shehu misnahig ata kashur, because now he's acting correctly. The implication, by the way, is very interesting. The implication is, what if he weren't acting correctly today? In other words, it says here that the thing that is called, that's Lashon Hara here, potentially, we said earlier, Devar She'eno Hagun, something that's not appropriate. So either the parents, grandparents, somebody he descended from did something, and that's, of course, you're not allowed, now this person isn't doing that. You're not allowed to speak about his ancestors negatively regarding something it's not relevant to him, or he himself may have done in earlier years, is not doing today. But what if the person is doing it today? Because it says here he's acting appropriately. We'll go back to that in a minute, but I just want to finish the parentheses. Or b'chesron hachmor, he does something without thought, without wisdom. Hain b'Torah, whether it's in Torah. Hain b'inyani oilam, whether it's in yanim in oilam. B'chol davar, so he says here, now outside the parentheses, shehu gnu salah. This is what we said was the general klal of Lashon Hara, but what's being said is derogatory, what we call a gnus. That's the whole thing. And so it seems to be that there is a heter. Are you with us, Mayor?
Yes, I'm following. Thank you.
Right. So there seems to be, from the implication here, if the person is in fact continuing, here it's saying if the person no longer does the bad thing that he did when he was young. What if he continues to do the bad thing that he does when he was young? Are you allowed to speak negatively regarding him? What do you think, Mayor? What do you think, Lou?
I think Kol v'chomer, you're not allowed to speak bad about him, because you might think, since he used to do it, but he doesn't do it now, oh, it's okay, because you're not saying something bad about him. He stopped doing it. Kol v'chomer, if he is doing it, then you're definitely saying something bad about him.
Okay, interesting. What do you think, Mayor?
I I thought that you weren't supposed to judge a person until you are in his shoes to try to understand what what's on this person's mind. We don't know what's on his mind necessarily. So it's like, how can we judge him?
That's where everybody is.
Oh, you were running around, Roy.
Okay, Roy, we're holding in Tess. You know, you were with them when they were in Ches. You have the place?
No, I've got a different volume. I don't know what's it about.
No,
I haven't got
okay,
the same-
it's Klal Vav. It says Klal Vav, and then it says paragraph Tess. It says Kashem Shashayach Isser Kabbalas Lashon Hara. Ba'im has Misaper Siper Lo. You want to try and find the place?
No, just go ahead and I'll see what I can do.
It's where we were yesterday. It's where we left
I
off.
wasn't here yesterday, so
Oh,
Yeah,
just,
Roy wasn't with us yesterday.
Oh, you bet.
Okay, so
Oh.
what we're speaking about, Roy, and what I asked was that we said that for the aspect of speaking negatively about a person, we're talking about speaking lashon hara against a person, speaking negatively about a person, or receiving that lashon hara. He said, so in a parentheses here, he says here, what is this negative, this thing? You're not supposed to say, we're not supposed to believe it, right? The person did something, she'ein davar she'eino hagun. Now, ata she'asa ata, what he said here, Isser Kabbalas Lashon Hara v'im ha'mesaper lo al echad she'asa ata. He did now something she'eino hagun, that wasn't appropriate, and we're not supposed to decide in our hearts that the thing is true. So then there was a parenthesis here that said, for example, to embarrass him regarding an action that his forefathers, something wrong that his forefathers had done. His forefathers used to eat tray, for example.
okay.
And you're not supposed to embarrass the person. He eats kosher. What's the problem? Don't talk to him and embarrass him because his forefathers did not keep kashrus, right? Or perhaps the person was a bali tshuva and he used to not eat kosher in his early years and he now does eat kosher. Okay, so you're not supposed to embarrass the person about it. Or perhaps he says here that the person did something that was lacking in intelligence, whatever that was. I can't really think of an example at the moment. Hain b'Torah, Hain, maybe he doesn't understand, how to put on. I mean, some of these things, it depends. If a person doesn't know how to put on tefillin, and he's putting them on wrong, you actually, it's the mitzvah to tell the person and correct the person.
Yeah, but not
but
talk to people about it.
not to tell other people about it. But but what I was trying to say was, if the person is going to be a negative influence, for example, the person being talked about is a friend of somebody's child, for example, and he's going to be a negative influence. So then, of course, you're allowed to tell your child, look at this boy that you have befriended, he does the certain things that aren't appropriate, and I don't really want you playing with him. I don't want you being friends with him because he'll be a negative influence on you. This is perfectly permitted. That's betoelis, and it's in fact in talking about where something is true, where the parent is concerned for the well-being of their child, or even if he's not your child, he's a friend of yours, and one of his friends, one of the people who he seems to be befriending is bad influence and will cause him to go off and do things that are not the Fidas Torah. So then you're allowed to warn the person for the sake of preventing the person from being negatively influenced. If the person is continuing in this way, if the person did it in the past, but he's no longer doing it, so then of course you're not allowed to do that. It's something of the past. It's not something of the present. Only if there's a current danger for the person's spiritual, just like if someone's going to physically hurt somebody, there's we know of Gedalia ben Achikan, the famous, we have a Tainus, Som Gedalia, right? That's after Rosh, after by the Yom Roim there, we have Som Gedalia.
Right.
So Gedalia, what Gedalia did, Gedalia was killed, and it led to the Jewish populace in Eretz Yisrael to be diminished. And then when we came, if he had stayed alive, then the return of the Klal Yisrael to Eretz Yisrael after the Galus of 70 years would have been a much better, much easier return, because there would have been a Jewish settlement, a small one that had remained. It would have changed everything. But because Gedalia ben Achikan was killed, now what happened with Gedalia ben Achikan? Somebody came and told him, there's a certain person who wants to kill you. And he said, I don't listen to Lashon Hara, he said to himself. And he didn't pay attention, and the person came and killed him.
Right.
And so he should have at least been cautious and careful regarding the quote, this warning. In other words, the warning was to protect him. And because he was such a big tzaddik, he was a little bit too big of a tzaddik, and he didn't take caution based upon the parameter of the one who is warned against coming to kill him. And in fact, the person did kill him, and it led to serious ramifications for the whole of the Jewish people, for history. And so that from there we learned that even though we're not supposed to receive Lashon Hara, but we're certainly allowed to take it and use it, the information, to be cautious and protect ourselves against damage and danger. Okay. Mayor, you want to continue? We're in the second half of Tess, just past the parentheses.
Just passed. Okay, hold on a second.
I mean, I could, unless you want me to finish it up, then we could just go to Yud, whatever works easier.
Okay, doesn't matter. So what's it? Let's see. It's the klal davar shehu genut alav. Okay. So what this is a matter concerning what, talking derogatorily about someone.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. In other words, anything, he's just saying, not just the examples we brought, but anything that's derogatory, it falls in this category.
Okay. Shenit tavinu gam kain shelo lehikabel divrei misaper lefanenu lehizbazut zot al
Right.
zebeinenu. Okay, and me, I guess that's who that they spoke about him. Okay, Shenemru Allah. Okay, so that let's see. We are also commanded about this. Okay, not talking derogatorily, and not to receive the words of one who is saying this, I guess, in front of us. Okay.
We're not supposed to decide in our hearts. It's defined here, l'kabel, shelo l'kabel, which we said earlier. The kabel means to machlit the libo, to decide in our hearts. That's the kabel. So that's what we're not supposed to do regarding either the examples of degrading words, negative words said, or some other example, whatever it may be. We brought some cases. That's what he's saying. Continue.
Okay. So Levitt bazut ayidei ze beinenu ami she'amru she'nemru alav. Okay, so let's see. That's Levitt bazot.
Levitt bazot is to embarrass.
Oh, to embarrass. Oh, okay, so to embarrass in our eyes. Let's see, Ami Shahu, that they're talking about. Yes, they've talked about Allah. Okay, so then it goes on. Let's see. All right, at Mishanim Marla. Oh, okay. Then it goes on. Lalo zed davar. So what? There's a general rule about this. Kol davar sheyesh al hamisaper isur avar diburo. Okay, so let's see. Kol davar. Any I guess word that the saper, is that like a storyteller?
Saper is to tell a story, right? It's the speaker, the one who's telling this story.
Okay, so
a misaper is the one who's telling the story, which in this case is we're concerned for lashon hara.
Right. So it's isur. It's a vile. It's forbidden. Avoid devaro. To avoid to pass these words, or to pass his words, I guess. So is that like to repeat his words, I guess?
No, sheyesh al misaper iser avur. Avur here like means regarding.
Oh, regarding his words.
Diburo, his dibur, yesh al hamekabel. In other words, regarding the dibur of the speaker, it's on the receiver to there's an isser to receive.
To receive it. Right.
Isser avur kabalaso. In other words, you don't always know what someone's going to say before they say it. So you can't sit there with a plug and put it, even if you had a plug, put it in people's mouths, it's not going to go so well. Okay. So sometimes we spoke about what can you do? You can change the subject. That's after you heard that this is going in the wrong direction.
Or maybe tell them we shouldn't be talking about this, right? Or something like that.
So Chofetz Chaim says that interesting reality, which seems to be clearly he knew, is that when you try to tell people what they're speaking is lashon hara, for example, if you give it a try, you'll notice that people will constantly try to answer you that it's not true, it's not lashon hara.
Right.
And they'll give you all kinds. They'll suddenly become geniuses in the whole Hilchos lashon hara, give you all the heteirim for what they're doing because it's toelis, because it's true, and the person's going to damage somebody, and it's whatever. They'll come up with all the heteirim. Bigger the Talmud Chacham, the bigger is heteirim. Nebuch. Because the more a person knows, the more a person. Because there's a very big, as we find, in the parshas that we just had, this week's parsha, last week's parsha, the coming parsha, right? The people who were speaking lashon hara, lashon hara started with the Nachash by Adam and Chava, right? It's something that been around since the beginning of creation, and the people who fell to it were people like Miriam with Aaron. And even Korach was a Noisa. Aaron was a giant in Torah. and all the Sanhedrin were listening, you know, and they fell to it. And, you know, and the Meraglim were called Anoshim. They were very, very big people in Torah and Yerushalayim. They weren't small people. Fortunately, we had Yoshua and Caleb who were Zeicha, but you see how dangerous it was that Moshe Rabbeinu changed Yoshua's name, that he shouldn't fall to the Meraglim. He changed his name. You know, when do we change a name? When a person's in sakana nefashos, we're concerned they're going to die. Someone's so sick where they're concerned they're going to die, we change their name, add a name. Moshe Rabbeinu added a yud to you instead of Hoshea to Yeshua to save him from the head. He shouldn't fall to the head of the Meraglim. Caleb, who was a real, you know, special individual to say the least, a giant in Yerushalayim, for saving himself, he went to the Kivrei Avos and lied on top of the Avos Kever, which we can't do today because it's not the same physical structure. It's a way above. It's a building above it. But apparently he knew where the Kivrei Avos was, and he went and prostrated himself. And it says in the Chumash, and pleaded that they should daven for him. He shouldn't fall to the chet of the Meraglim. So
No. He didn't
what?
daven for him. You can't ask for them to daven for you.
Wait a second. Excuse me. Yes, you can. That's exactly what you're allowed to do. You're not allowed to daven to them. You're allowed to ask them to be what we call in Hebrew a melitz yashar. That's perfectly permitted. There's a lot of things that are questioned.
We daven to Hashem. We don't daven to the Avos.
We're not davening to the Avos, but we can ask the Avos to daven to Kadosh Baruch Hu, to plead on our behalf also. It's a big thing. We learn the source of it is from the Chumash. You want to pull out a Chumash and show you what it says.
Please.
Would you? Okay, let me get the Chumash here.
Which one are you getting? I'll get it too.
It's the Parsha, this week's Parsha.
Oh.
Lach? Or we in?
Right.
Okay.
Let me just. Somebody was using that Chumash. 1 second. Kind of important. This is a very, very important. So yeah. Okay, I found at least a little Chumash here. I have one that's a better one somewhere, but somebody seems to have been using
Alan.
it. Okay, Shlach. Now it's in Parshas where we're at here. It's Parshas Shlach.
Does he want to get in?
Famous.
Oh,
Alan's trying to get in.
I don't know. Roy's on the phone with him.
Okay, we're going to try to find the story of the Meraglim here with Caleb ben Yefuna. See, Slach na la'avoin ha'am hazeh. I'll get maybe.
Sorry about that. That was Alan trying to get in. I told him it was your Lou's hosting. Sorry, so where is it in Shalach?
It's in Parsa Shlach. It says that, let me just see, I'm actually using my English just to get a quicker access for this one. Let me just find it quickly. I don't want to waste too much time. This is a famous story here. Let me find the source of it.
Yeah, it's 1316, it looks like.
1316?
Where he changes the name of
Where that's where
Says Moshe called him, let's see, 16. Vayikra Moshe leHoshea binun Yehoshua.
Right, but so
Okay.
they asked the question, why? See, they asked the question here, why didn't Moshe, like change the name of Caleb, or why didn't Yeshua daven by the Kivrei Avos?
Oh yeah, good question.
So they seem to be, there's some answers to the question, but they seem to be because they were different types of people, and different people need different solutions. Caleb, I'm trying to figure out how in the world, anybody in the English, how do you in English would you write Caleb?
Caleb.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, okay, Caleb.
I'm just trying to look it up in my R.A. Kaplan because here it is, Caleb. Survive, territory. Caleb, Kizanite, loyal, Miriam's husband, 190. That's Parshas Yisro, that's not the right place.
Okay, let's see.
416, 417.
Okay, so
Okay, anyway, in terms of, I think maybe this is a subject we'll have to deal with, perhaps have to deal with this one. Here, there are names. It's Lou, I'll have to get back to you on this one, just taking the whole group off the track here a bit. But
Yeah, I understand.
I will show it to you where it says it. This is actually the makor that you're allowed to go to Kivrei Tzadikim and to daven, and that you're allowed to daven for them. It's a sugya. I used to take groups, and I went and did the research on this a lot. This is like one of my specialties, if you want to call it that.
Oh, great.
So
I've gotten
I'm pretty confident about
people about this.
Right. Yeah, no, it's clear that this is the makor, this is the source from this parsha, from Caleb, who stops there and prostrates himself on the kever, and there's some who like to say that they're the kever of a tzaddik, like the avos and other tzaddikim, are holy places, and you dive into a Kadosh Baruch Hu. We know we always only, that's from the Shloshei Midos, after the davening is listed. Of course, you only dive into a Kadosh Baruch Hu. The question is, are you allowed to ask, just like, can you go to a tzaddik and say, daven for me, a living tzaddik, right? So many people go to tzaddikim and ask them for a bracha, or ask them to daven for them. That's something that's pretty obvious, right? There's nothing wrong with asking a tzaddik for a bracha, or asking a tzaddik to daven for you, that you should get a shidduch or have a refuah shlema or whatever it is. So the question is, are you allowed to do it by the Kivrei Tzadikim? So it seems to be pretty clear from this week's parsha that you are allowed. What are you not allowed to do? You're not allowed to ask a malach, for example. A malach, it's pretty clear that you couldn't say that one of the avos, some of the big tzaddikim used to have contact, like Yaakov Avinu sent malachim to be shlichim for him to do something. But you couldn't ask a malach to go and daven to a Kadosh Baruch Hu for you. That seems to be pretty questionable. Whether or not it's permitted or not is very, very questionable. Whether you're allowed to ask a malach to make some type of plea to a Kadosh Baruch Hu on your behalf. But it seems to be pretty clear that you're allowed to. And so that seems to be the getter, but I will show you the source for it another time. Maybe by tomorrow I'll have it down. I'll have it place without distracting. Okay, so we got to the end of Tess. We were holding by Kol Davar Sheyesh Al HaMisaper Iser Avur Diburo Yesh Lo HaMakabel Iser Avur Kabalaso. So in other words, where there's an Iser for the speaker, that's what he says in the last words here. Sheyesh Al HaMisaper Iser Avur Diburo. That's what it means. There's where Sheyesh Al HaMisaper Iser Avur Diburo. Where there's an Isser for the speaker for his speech, there's an Isser, then it says, Yesh al hamikabel Isser avur kabalaso. The avur means to say, for that is referring to what each one, the speaker gets an Isser for speaking, and the receiver gets an Isser for receiving. That's what he says here. Each one has their own separate Isser. That takes us to Yud. So Lou, maybe you'll start. Is Roy? Do you have the place?
No, I don't have the same Sefer yet. I'll have to get
Right.
it. I didn't.
You should have the same chapter designations though.
No, I've got chapter 1 and chapter 2.
You don't have chapter
that's-
6.
What?
You don't have
Six.
chapter 6.
No, I found it. This I've got. This was the start of a set. That was the start of a set. All right. This
Yes,
is
nice. Right,
yeah,
I understand, but it's
We've
you
got-
need a later volume.
You've got less
Yeah.
than a minute. What do we want to do now? We want to take a break for 5 minutes, or do we want to take a break for 15 minutes and do the next year?
What time is it now?
It's 11:18.